Please be seated. Maestro, maybe you bring your chair around here and join the circle. I'm going to sit with you too. And not so much preach, but talk with you as one Christian to another, or one Christian among many. To introduce the idea in July, as we hope to, in addition to some preaching from other clergy who will be with me, to one old friend whom I've known from my first day at seminary 28 years ago, and another whom I just met 3 weeks ago, who walked into our church and liked it and asked if she could help. And so in addition to that, we're inviting others to share their experience of faith in the church as part of our, as we strip down the formality of service in the summer, may we also share something of ourselves. And so I offer this not as a sermon for the priest and people, but I share with you something of my experience in faith throughout my life. So I'll start in the beginning. I was baptized before I knew what was going on in a church, and my father had a reel-to-reel tape recorder in the back, so I have a tape recording of it. I was not quiet. I was not happy about the whole experience. The Calvary Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It was the old prayer book, and we hear Father Morgan say, "Hath this child been baptized or no?" And then we heard a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth coming from the child who had not been baptized. It was years before I went into a church again, because church was not part of my parents' or even Christmas and Easter experience. My father was in the U.S. Navy, stationed in Germany, and then we came back. My mother went to the church bazaar because it was part of the community. And she, at the Women of Calvary events, she baked cookies and went to things, but that never actually seemed to involve Sunday morning. But church was at the center of the community, and she was part of the thing at the center of the community. It wasn't until I went to school, which happened to be an Episcopal boys' school, that I experienced chapel. And that really didn't strike me as church so much, because we were in our school uniforms, and what I now then learned later to be called acolytes were carrying flags and crosses in school uniforms. Not what I now then learned to become known as vestments. It was really assembly with hymns. And it wasn't until I had a paper route, very suburban thing to do, on Sunday mornings, where I delivered 60 6-inch thick copies of the Pittsburgh Press, which had to be on someone's doorstep before 9 a.m. And that was work, especially in the winter. I could only carry 5 at a time in a bag, so I had to buy a cart and a wagon. And in the winter, it was a sled to strap them on. I don't need to sound, it wasn't a hardship, but it was hard. And I gave that up after one winter. As we approached the next winter, I wasn't going to do it again. And I was giving the newspaper route over to a boy named Joey Mormon. I still remember it. He was a couple years older. And Mormon said to me, he said, "Hey, Montgomery, where do you skip church?" I thought that's a really odd thing to ask. And it was 6 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I skip at St. Irenaeus Roman Catholic Church down on 4th Street, 3rd Street. I said, "Well, I guess I skip at St. Thomas Memorial. I'd never entered the door. I skipped it every week." And so he said, "Well, let's skip together today." And so I said, "Sure." And I later that day learned, okay, so what skipping meant was going to his church first. Make sure of that. And he snuck in the back door of the church during Mass, took a leaflet from the usher's table to prove to his mother he'd been. He said, okay, let's go to your church next. It was a block away. We went over, we went to a door. I later learned had been locked for a century and didn't even have a door on the other side. It was a plastered over wall. And I said, well, they must be doing some work. Came around to another door, walked in, same scene, just a little more formal. And I looked up at the altar. There was the priest with the host above his head, and there were boys in vestments with their faces on the ground, and the host was being held above the priest's head. And I thought, and the organ was coming up to a crescendo. And I thought, well, this isn't school assembly. Something important's happening here. And I don't know what it is. It seems kind of strange, but I think it's important. And, wow. And so I took the leaflet. I didn't give it to my mother. She would have said, you're not allowed past 8th Street. What were you doing down on 4th? I would have been in trouble. And I went back the next Sunday with my mother's permission. And by Ash Wednesday, I was an acolyte. And by the following January, I'd been confirmed. And church became a family to me. It became a place where I belonged. It became a place, my parents didn't go, but it was a place where I belonged. And it was a joy for me to be there. I felt included. I felt it was something where I was drawn in and appreciated for who I was. And it was wonderful, intergenerational, and really just right. I didn't know about faith particularly, but I knew that the church was welcoming me. I assumed God in all this. I assumed God. Yes, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, His only Son, our Lord. Yes, I learned that by heart. I believed it. And I remember being 16 years old and alone in England for the first time. Alone for the first time. You remember that feeling of being alone for the first time? It's harder with cell phones. Maybe Nick and Felicity have never felt truly alone because your parents could always reach you with the push of a button. But my first summer, it was the summer of '83, I remember thinking, I was at Henley Royal Regatta, I was watching the races, I was in a tent in a backyard of someone by the Thames with permission. And I realized no one in the world knows exactly where I am right now. And no one can reach me. And that was a feeling of real aloneness. Real aloneness. I didn't feel God's presence. I just felt alone. Scared. And I realized what was missing was I had found the church, but I hadn't found faith. Luckily, my school chaplain was at Canterbury Cathedral for a semester sabbatical. And I got on the train to Canterbury the next day. And I walked into his house in the precincts and I laid it all out. And he said, yes, Montgomery. Go down to the SPCK bookstore and buy the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Read it. And if you have any questions, I'll help fix you up. I had a lot of questions. And I wasn't quite fixed up. But I'd begun a journey of faith with the chaplain in the Mother Church of Anglicanism, the Mother Church of English-speaking people. When I was in Canterbury Cathedral, reading C.S. Lewis's work, having interacted with Simon Mead, I guess his name is Father Mead. It was actually Mingus, but I had made a connection with another Christian soul. I'd made myself vulnerable by saying I didn't know if I even believed in God. And that began a journey of real faith for me. In today's gospel, and by the way, I felt God's presence by being in that holy place, and by that interaction with another Christian soul, and by making myself open and vulnerable to Him. Being in a holy place, being open and vulnerable to another Christian soul, asking God to be in your life, reading a book by someone who had struggled the way you're struggling. That's the way to begin a journey. It's the way to nourish a soul. It's the way to continue a journey. I offer that to you. I haven't progressed from 16. I've just given you me at 16. That's nothing from seminary. That's nothing preachy. That's just raw Montgomery at 16. And Jesus in today's gospel tells people who want to follow him, he's got his head pointed toward Jerusalem, and nothing's going to move him from the path. And so when he says to someone, follow me, and he says, but I've got to bury my relative. Let the dead bury the dead. Come on, we're moving. And another person says, but I need to take care of my affairs. No one who sets his hand to the plow is going to enter the kingdom of heaven. Let's go. Well, he wasn't saying ignore the dying or the dead. He wasn't saying ignore your earthly responsibilities. What he was saying is don't confuse those with the life of faith. Don't confuse those with the life of God. There's just some things that do distract us from that which is truly important. They get dropped in our laps all the time. And the people who drop them there think they're pretty important. We need to put those aside as Jesus was inviting the people who he included in today's gospel. And metaphorically, as Mr. Mean was inviting me to do that warm July afternoon, enter an empty cathedral. Ask God into your room. Like C.S. Lewis or some other meaningful author to you to walk the way with you and show you the path that is well trodden by others. Open yourself and your soul to another Christian, maybe a priest, maybe your spouse. I'll share with you, Ian, at how old am I now? 55.
56. 55.
55. I'm
Yeah.
55. I'll share with you, Ian, at 55. Yesterday, I was in a terrible mood. I think partly it's because I'm 11 months into not having vacation, and I'm about to start, so I'm at lower. We all get that. And so, I was just without sharing it all, I was in an awful place yesterday morning, and I shared that with my wife. And my wife said, go to church. Go and watch Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Go watch kids having fun. And it'll help your soul. And when I pulled Scott aside, our great director of the dance school, afterwards, and said, Scott, that was just terrific. And he said, thank you so much for coming. You know, I've been here for 30 plus years. And the clergy never come to these things. You haven't missed one since the day you arrived. And I said, well, that's selfish. Yeah, it's to support you. It's to show you that the leadership of the church cares about the dance school. But it's selfish because you saved me. This brought me out of the desolate pit. It poured oil on the waters of my soul. And he said, watching the children the little children, who we've taught choreography for 8 weeks. And then when they get in the rabbit suit, and they get out there, all they do is smile and wave at their parents. And he said, it's a joy. It's an absolute joy. And so I offer you, when you're at a low point, heck, go do something that's just innocent and wholesome and fun. And let it feed your soul. So that's Ian at 10, Ian at 16, Ian at 55. Jesus at 33. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Spirit.